Hey folks, welcome back to Sub2 Investor. In this episode, I want to talk about how I screen tenant buyers and seller finance buyers for properties that we purchased subject to or with seller financing. And then we want to turn around and do a rent to own, a lease option, or full on seller financing, either with a wrap note or contract for deed. These are all creative exit strategies that allow you to more passively cash flow on these creative finance deals and create these enormous spreads, arbitraging interest rates, and all this kind of stuff that we are familiar with doing in creative finance. You're going to want to stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to show you my rent-to-own application and a borrower pre-screening application for the seller financing side of things. This is not going to be a totally in-depth tutorial or anything like that. If you're interested in that, go to my website, Sub2 Investor, or just reach out to me, Hans at Sub2 Investor, and ask about the training and coaching program that I offer. But in this video, I want to give some basic information that's going to help you get started placing tenant buyers or buyers in your properties. Because after all, the reason why we love subject to and creative finance is that we get to offer a creative solution to people who would like to own a house, and we get paid for doing that and offering that opportunity. We have to know what to look for when screening potential residents for our properties. And this is a topic that not too many people in the creative space, in the Sub2 space, talk about or have a lot of experience with. And so I'm happy to spend more time on this side of things. Now, this is not legal advice and I'm not an attorney, so definitely whenever you are doing seller financing, you want to consult a legal expert. I'll just be showing you a little bit of my process. In a former video, if you haven't seen this other video on how I market with bandit signs to find tenant buyers and owner finance buyers, definitely go back to that video and check it out. But once you have some prospects, what is the next step? Well, for me, it's always going to be a phone conversation, just getting to know the individual before I even send them an application. I like to get on the phone, hear a little bit about their situation, why they're looking for a rent to own or a seller finance property, what their income situation looks like, what kind of down payment they have. These are all the things in the back of my mind. Plus, obviously, have you ever had any issues with evictions or foreclosure in the past? Those are going to be major red flags. And so my first step is always just a phone conversation before I ever send an application, because I don't want to waste their time, but really I don't want to waste my time when I could have just really pre-screened them quickly on the phone before even getting to the point of sending a paper document or an electronic document to them. Now, let's step back here for a second. Really, we're talking about two totally separate exit strategies when we're clumping together rent to own and seller financing. These are not the same things, and in fact, they are very, very different, even though they can feel the same from our perspective when we place a tenant buyer or a tenant option or a buyer. They feel the same sometimes, but in fact, they're very, very different. So we're going to need to clarify that when we place a tenant buyer or a tenant optionee, somebody who's doing a lease and option, a rent to own, that screening process is going to look probably quite different than seller financing. The big difference here is that you are not selling the property on a lease and option. When you do that exit strategy, the tenant buyer or tenant optionee, as some people call it, they are signing two documents typically. At least in my program, it's going to be a standard lease agreement and then an option to purchase agreement or a purchase option agreement. Two different documents. One of them is just a standard lease, doesn't even mention that there's a purchase option, and then the purchase option contract, which is going to try to avoid mentioning the lease so that they really are two separate contracts. And the purchase option is simply giving the tenant the right to purchase property at a set price within a certain period of time. And there can be other terms within that purchase option contract as well. But when you are screening a tenant buyer or tenant optionee, really it's a lot less rigorous of a screening process than it is with a seller financing sale. Because with a seller financing sale, it's a sale and you are financing the property to your end buyer. And so when you're doing a lease and option, really all you need is a standard rental application. And if you follow the wisdom of the ages of investors who have held many rental properties and you listen to what they say, generally you're going to be fine just placing your tenant optionee. You're going to be fine screening them if you just stick to industry standards. Real quickly, what are the industry standards when screening a tenant? Well, first thing I look for is a history. Do they have a history of prior evictions or trouble with their prior rental properties? Did they ever own a house before and were they foreclosed on, or did they sign a deed in lieu? That's the biggest predictor in my mind of whether these prospects will pay on time. Did they prioritize their housing payment in the past? They might have fantastic income, make a ton of money, but if they are the kinds of folks who are not paying their bills on time, they don't prioritize that, well then the likelihood that they're not going to prioritize it on my property is quite high, and the best predictor of future action is previous action. And so you're looking at their previous actions, and if they're not paying their bills, they're not paying their rent, that's the main thing, then that's a major red flag and they're not going to qualify. Let me say one more thing on that topic. They may not pay their credit card bills on time, they might have some student loans, but if they are always paying their rent on time, if I contact their landlord and they have a raving review, if I can contact 2 or 3 previous landlords and they are religiously paying their rents on time, then that's really all I need. I need them to just prioritize their housing. I don't need them to prioritize their high interest rate credit cards or car payments necessarily. What's most important is the housing. There's a lot of gray when you're evaluating and weighing different things, but that's a major priority when you're screening really on either side, the rent to own or the seller financing. So number 2 with the rent to own lease option side of things is stable employment. How long have they been employed? Is it the same job? I'm not so concerned about how much they're making. That's a lot less important. Of course, you want it to be enough to cover not just the housing payment, but their utility bills, their groceries, etc. A lot of people go for their gross income being 3 times the amount of the rent. But really what's most important is that they've had stable employment, that they've always worked or have a habit or a history of just being gainfully employed. They don't have to be making a lot of money, but they're the kind of folks who go to work and they do their job and they produce a paycheck, and they've done that in the same industry, ideally, not some new career that they just jumped into and maybe they only have 2 months of history in this new industry or in this new field. Your ideal candidate has been in their field of work for some time, and it's unlikely that they're going to lose their job, but if they did, that they could just go find another similar job somewhere else. So that's also very important. Number 3, I'm going to say is, I'm just going to stop holding my fingers up because my hands are starting to hurt. You do want to run their credit, and the credit score is not very important to me. I know a lot of landlords and property management companies want a credit score above a certain number, maybe above 650 or 700, but you got to keep in mind we are collecting an upfront option fee on a lease and option or a down payment on seller financing. So there is skin in the game. So you always have to put that into the equation here. Credit score is not something I care a lot about because some folks don't know how to maintain their credit. They don't know how to get a better credit score. There's plenty of financially irresponsible people who know how to get a good credit score so they can go leverage debt, but then they are totally irresponsible paying that debt when it comes down to it and they're forced to. So credit score is important. Everything I'm saying right now applies to the rent to own. When you get to the seller financing, credit score becomes more important for sure. But it's not everything. And what's more important, and this is number 3, is that they don't have a bunch of collections, like a pattern of going out, getting some new debt, and then just not paying it. And you can see this on their credit report. You need to pull their credit and the background check. Obviously, they can't have anything major on their background in terms of criminal activity. In my opinion, just gets pretty risky at that point. I think there is a place for exceptions there for sure, but as a general rule, it's not something we really look at. But in terms of a ton of collections, right? Like if they've got 20, 30 collections on their credit report and you can't verify their rental history super confidently, then it's going to be a pass, right? Like it's way too risky. These folks are not paying their bills. And so you have to know how to read a credit report. It's not just all about the credit score. It's also about what's on the credit report. Things like student loans are not extremely important to me because a lot of people have them, and some other like life event stuff. Like if it was from a divorce where they got stuck with something on their credit or a medical bill that was unexpected, sometimes there might be a collection out for those those kinds of things. Or maybe it was a car that was repoed, but there's a really good explanation for why that was the case. And you have a couple outstanding items like that, which might kind of scare the average landlord off. But if you really learn how to read the credit report, you see that they do have a history of paying their credit cards, paying other debts on time, but they have a few outstanding collections. It's not a huge deal to me. I'm willing to look past those things if they have a sizable option fee to put down. Let me just insert a side note here that all of this, as you're doing your due diligence period, if you think the prospect might be a good candidate, some of these things that come up you might use as leverage to ask for a larger option fee or to up their monthly payment. So just keep that in mind because it is a risk analysis game, and if you are going to take somebody a little more risky, then it makes sense to ask for a little bit more from them in terms of skin in the game, especially up front before you sign anything. And then number 4, I would say, is references from previous landlords or property managers. This is pretty important, and this ties back in with number 1. I guess I should have just included it in number 1 here, but you really got to verify that these folks lived where they said they lived, and you got to talk to the property manager or the owner of that property. Make sure you're actually talking to the person who managed the property, who walked the property, show them the property. They know these individuals. I've been lied to before. I think it happened to me at least one time where the landlord was just trying to get rid of the tenant, so they gave him a good review, but really they were just trying to shove him off to some other sucker, and so I got stuck with a bad person. But you got to make sure you're talking to the right person, verify that they've been paying on time their rents, get some sort of signed statement or letter from the previous landlord with that regard, because again, the greatest predictor of future action is past action, and if they've always paid their rents on time, they're likely going to pay you on time. So those are really the 4 main things in my opinion, but let me pull up my rent-to-own application and maybe there's something I'm missing here. Let me also say that of course you need to abide by all of the anti-discrimination and fair housing laws and regulations whenever placing a resident. All right, so here is a form that if this is a lease and option, they are going to fill this out and return it to me. We do use DocuSign to do this often, but you can do this in person or you can email it to them and they can print it, fill it out, scan it, email it back to you. But it is important to collect, by the way, a photo ID, a valid identification from them, and then have them fill out the basic information about their name, their email, their driver's license number, just to verify their identity and have this on record if you ever need to use it in the future. And then this little line right here is pretty important for the lease option portion of this whole deal here, is that available funds to put down. This is worded in such a way to really try and get a number out of them, because maybe they have more funds to put down than they told you, and you might be able to get a little bit larger of an option fee from them if you run their application and some things come back which are a little bit less than desirable. So by the way, I am having them fill out this application, and then I am having them do a credit and background check all at the same time, and that's their entire application for the most part. And that's their entire application. You can use Turbo Tenant, you can use Zillow. There are a bunch of other services that will check their credit and their background, but that's what we've used in the past. So you're trying to see what they have available in terms of cash, and also what the source of their down payment or option consideration fee is, because if it's borrowed funds or something like that, it's not as much skin in the game. And so it's ideal to have their own money from their checking account or savings account being used to put down. It's also good to know if they are planning to live with anybody else, or if anybody else is going to be involved in the transaction. If their sister's going to live with them and their sister's going to put the money down, then the sister needs to be listed as applicant number 2, for example. Then after this, you're going to want to get their current address along with their dates of occupancy there, the current amount that they're paying, which I think is interesting to observe, because if you're asking a lot more than what they're currently paying, this could be difficult. So you need to make sure you know what have they paid in the past, because if they've paid on time only like $800 a month, but your house is $2,000 a month, then that's a pretty large delta, and you're going to need to really feel comfortable before moving forward with somebody like that. Make sure that they can actually afford those payments. And then the reason for moving, obviously you want to make sure there's not something fishy going on here. Are they being evicted? Are they being offered a cash for keys? Do they have some other judgments pending against them, or some other dubious reason why they need to move into your house? house. Usually if they need to move and they're telling you I need to move ASAP, this is not a good sign. There's a reason why they are needing to move out of their current housing, and it's usually not a good thing. Then you're going to get their landlord's name, their number, their mailing address, and also this might be the property manager, and you're going to contact them. You need to contact them to verify that they do live here, that they have been paying that rent amount, and why they're moving. What condition did they leave the house in? I have like a whole 10 questions for property managers or landlords. If we're trying to get a reference that I shoot over to them, I have them answer. It might be more like 5 or 6 questions, but that's an important step as well. And then you're going to get the same information on even the previous place where they were renting. So ideally you get 2 previous landlord references and all that kind of stuff. Now, if they're currently living with family and not paying rents, this could be a red flag. You just want to really dive into things like that, right? Like, how long have they been living without rent, living with their family? Because it very well could be that they are squatting in their family's house and not paying them rent, and whoever it is, their uncle, is a terrible landlord. They're not answering the phone. You can't get a reference from them. They can't really produce canceled checks or proof from a checking account that they've been paying this amount of rent every single month. Essentially, you want to see if they're lying at all. If they're lying a ton on this, like if they're saying that their rent amount is $800 a month, and then you go and ask for 2 or 3 or 4 months of checking account statements to verify that they've been paying this amount, and then they go and say, oh, actually, we don't pay it from our checking account, we just pay it cash, and there is no way to verify. Red flag. If you go to check it and it's not $800 a month, it's only $550 a month, well, it's like, well, why did you put $800 a month? You need to be able to verify their rent payment. And it's usually not just enough to get the landlord to say that, yeah, they've been paying this and they're good. I like to see proof that they've been paying this. It could be a Venmo screenshot from the past 12 months or 6 months or whatever you need, that they've been paying $500 or $800 a month in rent to the landlord, right? They can send you a screenshot from Venmo, from Cash App, from Zelle, whatever, every single time. They should be able to produce proof. That's my point here, that they pay on time and with the date. I want to see the date on which they paid this. So this is a pretty important thing to me, as you can tell. And then scrolling down, you're going to get the employment information from them. And this is pretty important to me, like especially if it's a new job and they don't have a long employment history in their field. If they do, and they've been working at the same job in the same industry for 5, 10, 15 years, then really just this one employment paragraph here is all you need. You're going to contact the employer and you're going to get verification that they've been working at this place for how long they've been working and roughly how much they're making, because they're going to put all of that information right here, how much they're making, when they get paid. And then you're going to go to their bank statements and try and verify all of this stuff to see that they're telling you the truth. And so then after this, I get some references as well down here. And sometimes I contact these references if I can't get a hold of the people I need to get a hold of. But sometimes you want to call these references. I don't always call them, but oftentimes family is going to have a perspective on these folks that you're not going to get elsewhere. Family and friends, you really want to try and get down to business. You want to get down into the dirt to see if there's anything that you just need to be aware of before you get into a business relationship with these folks. That's all I'm going to reveal of my rent-to-own application, because this is something I include within my coaching products that you can get at my website, sub2investor.com, or if you're part of my training, then this will all be provided to you, and I don't hold anything back if you sign up. And these documents do get updated. If I ever need to update them, you'll have access to the latest version of these forms. I hope that gives you a sense of what my process is, and you're going to develop your own process when you set out to do this, whether you get my forms and use them or you create your own. But generally speaking, we are getting people through the property first to see the property. Once they like the property and want to proceed with an application, they know the basics of the terms. We're looking for about this much down. Here's how much your payment's going to be. Then they're saying we're still interested. We say, all right, great. Fill out this rent-to-own application, and we're going to do a background background and credit check at the same time. Then, if everything's checking out pretty good, you're going to go one step further and ask for verification and proof of everything that they stated on their application. So namely, that's going to be their previous housing, their landlord information, and then their employment information as well. Those are the big ones that we verify using bank statements, screenshots, canceled checks. Again, screenshots from Zelle, Cash App are pretty common because a lot of folks may not use their checking account a whole lot and just kind of are living paycheck to paycheck. So that's okay, but we do like to get, if it's a full-time job like a W-2, then you can ask for W-2s. You can ask for tax returns as well. That's not uncommon, and you can certainly ask for that. Usually bank statements for sure. Really just you're trying to create this paper trail, a sort of packet of proof that everything that they said on their rent-to-own application is turning out to be true. So that's all good. I keep all that stuff in one file, so if I ever need to go back to it, it's there. That's all on the rent-to-own lease option side of things, and I haven't even gotten to seller financing. And so what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to create another video as a follow-up to if you're going to sell a property on seller financing, what are the steps that you take to do that? And in short, they do look different. If you are going to be doing multiple of these and doing them properly, is going to look very different. So stay tuned for that video. If you found this video valuable, then please hit the like button, leave me a comment, let me know what other questions you have, things I forgot to mention or didn't talk about. I'd love your opinion and your feedback. Let me know how you do things differently. If you do things differently, that would be very helpful for folks to know. I would be very curious to hear, and I'm sure other people would find that feedback valuable. So thanks for watching. Until next time, stay creative. Peace.